Okay, let's get started. Okay, Ann, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. I think we're going to do the prayer first, and then I'll call roll.
Call to order. Okay, invocation. I didn't know. I don't see the roll call in here, so I didn't know where it is. Okay, we'll do the invocation first. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. Please join me in prayer. We thank you for the many blessings you have freely given to each of us. We ask for your presence to guide this meeting of the CPS Energy Rate Advisory Committee. Provide them with the knowledge, compassion, and wise counsel needed as they discuss the business matters on today's agenda. Help us all to remember that we are stewards acting on behalf of our customers, and provide us with the grace to serve all people well. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now we'll call the roll.
Yes, sir. Reed.
Here.
Thank you. John Agather. Here. Anaqua Garcia. Here. Councilwoman Villagran. Here. Peter Ononfree. Thank you. Andy Castillo. Here. Al Rodriguez. Here. Got it. Dr. Cantu. Here. Michael Kinnick. Here. Anne Marie. Here. Jack, I believe, is going to be out today. So Wayne Eddington. Here. Tony Edwards. Let's see, Tony. Michael Sanchez. Here. Didi Balmaris. Here. Kurt. Here. Thank you. Dr. Femi's not here. Dana. Here. Jim Berg. Here. And Anita Ledbetter. We have a quorum. Excellent.
Okay, a couple of things before we get into the public input, and we have one speaker today. I've been talking with several folks and the CPS group, and we're going to move the May 19th meeting to May 26th. The reason is the way the dates fall, it's not giving them enough time, and nor do I think it's appropriate. You've got to give them as much time because that's the first month they're going to start presenting their cases. And also, I've got several folks that in that middle of May, they're out because of graduations. So we'll be doing that on the 26th. Also, I've talked to several folks, and it's clear if we're going to keep our participation up during the summer, we're going to have to shift these back to hybrid meetings. We'd prefer you to come in person, but if you are out of town, we want your participation. I am not the most efficient at dealing with online and in person, but we'll do our best to make sure that even if you're online, that you'll be worked into the discussion as appropriate. That's the only two general announcements. Now we have Tom Vime here for public input in person. Tam, would you come up, please?
Thank you. Okay. Hi, my name's Tuan Pham, and I'm the president of PowerFin. We develop and operate solar projects, including the Solar Host program here in San Antonio. I wanted to talk to you today about an article recently published in the San Antonio Report. The title of the article is Why CPS Energy Needs to Stop Subsidizing Solar. Three key points I want to highlight for this committee. One, there are two solar subsidies that currently exist in San Antonio. A, solar rebates, and B, net energy metering. To further distinguish, solar rebates are an explicitly funded program, under STEP, and net metering is a billing policy, not an explicitly funded program. But numerically speaking, and the article talks about this, solar rebates have cost CPS $160 million to date, and the effect of net metering will result in over $1 billion of lost revenues. So to further clarify, solar rebates and provide some perspective on this, Solar rebates are actually a rarity with any utility today, and net metering is actually typically imposed on utilities by state-level mandates. So the second point I'd like to point out is, solar is just no longer a cottage industry. It no longer needs subsidies. So, despite a lack of, for example, despite a lack of statewide incentives, today Texas is the #2 state for solar as far as installed capacity goes. That's all unincentivized at the state level. And then the last point is that, unsubsidized solar today is more affordable than dirty energy. So by stripping away subsidies, affordable and technology-enabled solar will more quickly find its way to more people, and San Antonio will not only achieve its climate goals, but blow past them. So CPS is currently has an open and highly competitive bidding process for 900 megawatts of solar under the Flex Power Bundle. Because unsubsidized solar is so expensive, the Flex Power Bundle will not only provide demonstrable progress towards decarbonization, but it also will reduce electricity rates for everyone. And so to summarize, solar rebates and net metering are actually impeding significant expansion of solar in San Antonio. The cost of these subsidies is actually accelerating and being forced on citizens who can't afford solar. In conclusion, this just needs to stop. So, thank you.
Sorry I messed up your name. I'll do better next time. Okay, we're going to be talking about two things today. First, we'll be talking about the energy conservation programs, demand management, and then we'll be talking about the metering. Just a couple of housekeeping points. Dr. Romero has got to teach at 5, so she's live streaming with us, listening to us. And Anna Sandoval had a zoning case, had 3 zoning cases this afternoon that she had to attend to. So both of those folks wanted me to let you know that. Okay, it's Rick Luna's next, and then after Rick makes his presentation on their proposals, we'll start over here. We started there last time. We'll start over here this time. We'll go around and take comments in the discussion and question section. So, Rick, you're up.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Reed. So again, Rick Luna, Director of Technology and Product Innovation, and I'm here to continue the discussion on energy efficiency and conservation programs. You'll recall that we had a conversation last month where we talked about, well, really we kicked off the discussion talking about a report that we had asked the Brattle Group to put together on the STEP program. And since then, we've continued the dialogue, and what we want to do today is talk to you about some options and get your feedback. So let me see here. Over the course of the last month, we've had a lot of conversation. If you followed our board meeting, we talked about key decision points where we've tried to really frame out, what are the key levers in terms of considering a future program. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that today, and then we've put together 2 scenarios or 2 options to help advance the discussion, and so we will ask you to consider them. We'll walk through how we build those scenarios, and then we welcome your feedback as we get to the end there. So I'll start by going over this timeline again. We showed this to you last month. So again, we started the conversation in February. During March, we were here. We were at the Citizens Advisory Committee. We were at our board meeting. Same this month. And so this, continuing dialogue. We expect to be back as we further refine a proposal. working towards a summer decision on this. We've said before, the program currently is slated to end July 31st, which is when the current ordinance or step bridge ordinance expires. Okay, I mentioned this concept of key decision points. We show them there on the graphic on the right. And what we wanted to do here was to lay out really the key options, the key points of discussion for us to have as a community and as stakeholders. You know, the most important fundamental question is, should we continue the program? Some of you have sent us your opinions on that question. We have heard from the board, we've heard from others, and we don't want to take it for granted that there has to be a program, right? I mean, not having a program is an option that we wanted to put out there for discussion. If there is a program, you know, what should the goals be? And we'll share some concepts around goals. You know, but what should the goals, the high-level goals and priorities be of a program? What should be the length of a program? The original STEP program was 12 years. You know, looking back today, that seems like a long time. So what is the right time frame to allow for flexibility, but without having a huge, you know, long-term commitment like we did with 12 years? And then finally, budget, which is really another way of saying, you know, bill impact. You know, what are we comfortable with respect to the cost of the programs, the scale of the programs, and of course, you know, ultimately these do show up on customer bills, and so we want to gauge the feedback around that. So again, you know, we don't take it for granted that, you know, the programs, you know, it's an affirmative decision whether to continue them or not. So far, most of the feedback we've had has been supportive, and certainly our board seems to be supportive, and so we will be sharing these with them as part of that discussion of what's the right scale, you know, going forward. So I mentioned goals. These were goals that we identified as potential goals. Not to say that there couldn't be others, but these seem to sort of bring together some of the key elements of what folks are looking for, and that can be achieved through these programs. Of course, assisting limited income customers, whether through programs like weatherization, other things that help them improve the efficiency of their home, is certainly an objective that can be met with energy efficiency and conservation. Helping customers save energy and save money on their bill is another one, and I think we've done a lot of this over the years. Is helping improve the efficiency in the community, reducing emissions, reducing you know, the amount of generation that's required to serve our load has a direct impact on emissions. It aligns with the goals of the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, so that could certainly be a high-level priority. Innovation, so transitioning the programs to new technologies, just like we did 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago, solar was new, you know, demand response, thermostats, the smart thermostats were new. Well, today there are technologies like electric vehicles, like battery storage that are new and emerging, and so this is an opportunity to transition to some of these new technologies and encourage customers to adopt that technology. So that can be a focus of the programs. Reducing the need for generation. Of course, that's what STEP was mainly about, right? Was reducing the need to build a power plant. So we could certainly continue that work through these programs. And then finally, again, you know, having smaller programs. If affordability and rate relief is our primary consideration, we could scale back the size of the programs as a priority of what we want to achieve going forward. So, you know, we spent some time on these goals because really, you know, once we define goals, it becomes you know, easier to then build programs to meet those objectives. And so in terms of the design of the programs, the metrics, the outcomes, it should all be driven towards goals, right? And so we think it's worth spending some time on this. So now we'll transition to two options that we put together. Again, these are for discussion, and we welcome your feedback. What we wanted to do was show And we'll walk through the process of, going from budgets to programs to outcomes over the next couple of slides. But here, this first option is really focused on, reducing or minimizing bill impact. And so you'll see here on the bottom, we've got in yellow a $50 million a year scenario, which is less than we've been doing in the last several years. And so that comes with a smaller price tag. And so today we recover about $3.50 from our residential customers. In this scenario, it would go down. Eventually, it would go down to $2.50. So if our priority is reduce the impact and scale, we could do that while still having a comprehensive portfolio. $50 million allows us to continue to run many programs at significant scale. There are some choices that have to be made about new programs, and we'll get into that. But you can still have a comprehensive portfolio while managing that bill impact. As a second option, we put together a program that is comparable in scale to what we do today, actually a little bit larger, $70 million a year. We're assuming a 5-year time frame here. Again, that's open for discussion, but in putting this together, we needed to sort of make a judgment call there. So we used 5 years, and then we'll get into the details of this one as well. We had a question from a member of the RAC about, we show the bill impact. This is a residential bill impact, so the average residential customer. I do want to share with you the bill impact for larger customers, just so you understand what that looks like. And so thank you to Chad for putting these together today. So for our PL customers, so that's our rate class, it's our smallest commercial rate class, the bill impact is $17 a month or $200 a year. So just so you get the sense of scale, it's about 6 or 7 times what a residential customer pays, and that's directly tied to usage, right? The more you use, the more you pay for these programs. The next higher level is our LLP customer. They would pay $394 a month. Our ELP, again, the bigger customer, is $3,250 a month. And then our very biggest class of customer, which is the SLP, our very large customers, it's over $18,000 a month that they pay towards the STEP program. Okay, so with that, I will go to the next slide. So we've talked about budget. The next thing is to start to put together the programs that are feasible and that can, really play a part in meeting the goals. The feedback that we've had has been to have comprehensive programs, not just one goal, but achieve multiple goals. And so we've taken a shot at that, and what we've tried to do here is indicate by check marks sort of what we think can be included there. Again, none of this has been decided. We're looking for feedback, but this is a proposal. Trying to gauge the feedback that we've had so far. So we have on the yellow section, which is our existing program portfolio, the weatherization, energy efficiency, demand response. All of those are included in both of the options that we'll show here in a minute. You'll notice traditional solar rebates is not included. So that makes up the rebates that we pay when you install solar on your home or business. The logic there is that we have seen incredible momentum on the solar side in terms of customer-owned solar. Utility solar is separate. We're talking about when the customer owns it, installs it on their own home or business. We've seen incredible momentum, even as we've been declining our incentives pretty drastically. Last year, our incentive was only 8% of the cost of a system, and yet we had a record year. I think the last 5 years, it's been 15% growth every single year as our rebate has come down, which tells us that there's incredible momentum there, which, really it has become almost self-sustaining. And so that's an opportunity to redirect dollars. We spend about $13 million a year on solar rebates. We can redirect that to new programs. And we've indicated some of those here, things like multifamily weatherization, programs for low-income customers, behavioral programs, new technology like EV charging, non-traditional solar options, which are programs that really help address barriers to solar adoption, so really targeting solar to lower income customers, non-traditional areas where maybe solar has not gone before, or not, it just hasn't been, we haven't seen the adoption maybe that we've seen with other programs, battery storage, and so forth. Okay, so continuing to work through here, so we talked about budget, we talked about programs, then we start to allocate dollars, and really these are the levers that get us to outcomes, right? We put dollars into buckets, we try to look at, okay, what has been our traditional spend, what do we think is the size of the market and the opportunity, what has been the feedback we've had, and then we allocate dollars. And so I'll start from the bottom just to explain what each category is. So the first is the green, which is our admin and marketing expense. And so these are 5-year numbers. So 16 million over 5 years, it's about $3 million a year. That is staffing, that is marketing, outreach, that is evaluation costs that we have that are pretty much fixed. In the 2 scenarios we have, we didn't change them because really those are mostly fixed costs, and we've got lots of data on what that would run us in a normal year. Next up is in orange is our weatherization program, and it's the largest, I guess, bucket up here. The idea of equity being foundational. So we have almost $16 million a year, a little more than $16 million a year allocated in both scenarios, under both scenarios for weatherization programs. That's actually more than that's consistent with what we've spent in the STEP, over the last 10 years. It's about 300 homes, 280 homes a month. So it's pretty significant amount of investment in single-family weatherization. Next up is demand response. Very cost-effective programs, lots of operational benefits and cost savings. Really been one of the real foundational pieces of what we've been able to do over the last 10 years. And so we have those included here. We have demand response programs included in here, comparable to what we've been doing here recently. And so then we start to get to some of the ones where maybe we can move some dollars around. We have commercial energy efficiency. We have residential energy efficiency. If you look at the 2 scenarios, obviously more dollars in the one on the right. The one on the left represents about 60% of what we do today. So it entails some scaling back of energy efficiency. The one on the right is closer to full scale of what we do today. So just so you can understand sort of what the difference there is. And then finally at the very top, the top sliver there is future programs. Again, things like low-income programs, multifamily weatherization, new technology, non-traditional solar options. All of those are included in the new program category, which really represents sort of that pivot to the future, right? Things that we have not done, emerging technology, opportunities to do new things. Okay, almost done. So we talked about the budget, and so then these are the outcomes. And what we've done is we have a model that we've created over the years that allows us to forecast, what the outcomes are for a given level of spend per program. And so this is what we show here. Again, this is over 5 years. There's a 5-year window. And so if you look at the very top row, demand reduction, this is what we did with the STEP program, right? This is the need to avoid a power plant, megawatt capacity. We have 265 megawatts under the first scenario, 410 under the second. So you're thinking, well, 771 is a bigger number. Yes, but that's also a 12-year number, and this is a 5-year number. So just so you can sort of calibrate, the difference there. Energy savings is the next one. We had feedback from some stakeholders about, quantify the energy savings in terms of your sales, like how much are you reducing your sales? And so we've created this metric here. It's a standard metric, actually. A lot of utilities use this. And so you can see there 0.7% first-year savings in relation to sales with the first program, 1% with the second one. Okay, so taking kilowatt hours then, very easily we can translate that to emissions reductions. So if you don't have to generate the energy, then you don't have emissions, and we have factors that we can use to calculate what that is. And so we've quantified that in millions of avoided, tons of avoided carbon. And then equity. We called out equity here because I thought, we have commonly reported on how many houses have we weatherized. So we thought we would do that here. And so this is our estimation of how many homes we could weatherize. You'll see that the 16,000 homes, that represents single family. It's the same in the two scenarios because the budget was the same in both scenarios. The part that's differential is the multifamily piece, which we've considered a new program. We don't currently offer that today, but we think that there's value in moving into that segment. It certainly is underserved. And we have 10,000 and 20,000 under the two different scenarios. And then finally, system benefits. So we've talked a lot about the cost of the programs. That we think it's important to talk about what are the benefits. And you've heard us talk a lot about cost effectiveness. What we do with cost effectiveness is we compare the benefits to the cost. It's a ratio, benefits to cost. We've shown you that we've had a cost effectiveness ratio greater than 1, so the benefits outweigh the cost. And so what we've done here is to quantify that. So what are the benefits? And really we measure those in terms of avoided fuel and capacity costs. There's also transmission savings and so forth. And so we've quantified those here. And so that $475 million is in relation to a cost of $250 million. So it's a better than 1 ratio of benefit to cost. And likewise on option 2, $665 million in relation to a cost of $350 million. Okay, last slide. So just some final thoughts. Things we wanted to make sure we communicate to you. First of all, we are committed to starting fresh with the program, really focusing on the future. Certainly, we've run this program for a long time, but this is an inflection point. It's an opportunity to have a conversation of what it should look like going forward, and so we welcome the feedback from that perspective. We're going to be transparent about the cost of the programs. We've heard lots about that. Certainly we can enhance the communication so the customers know, how much they are paying for these programs. And then finally, program flexibility is important. What we've proposed here is 5 years. We think that there should be a check-in. So maybe at year 3, we check in, make sure that we're on track, make sure that it still makes sense, that we're achieving the metrics and the priorities that were set forward, and then we can course correct if needed. So certainly things are changing quickly, expectations change quickly. We want to stay nimble and be able to adapt to that. So with that, welcome your feedback, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Rick. Thank you very much. Okay, what we're going to do, we started over here last time. Some people over here didn't get to speak, so we're going to start over here. The only person that got really messed up is Al, and he was over here last time, so we'll make sure we get to him, okay? And so but to do that, I don't mean to be heavy-handed here or any kind of control freak, but let's keep it to 2 minutes. I'll time it, and then that way we'll get around, and then probably get around again. And we'll start with John Agather.
I have no comment.
Okay, Michael, go ahead.
Okay.
And
thanks.
I want to just call out everybody, just pass it on, and everybody knows everybody, so
Right.
let's just treat it like we're here regularly. Go ahead, Mike.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Luna. That was a great presentation. I'm now a little bit more smarter about this. It appears to me, though, that CPS is trying to get customers to not use its product in some of the categories of information that I saw here. I don't know of any business that does this, that tries to get its customers not to use its products. Perhaps maybe CPS should get out of the conservation, low-demand business and leave that to private industry. While the popular science narrative tells us that low CO2 is good, that it's a good thing, I would suggest reducing the need for new generation does not help the economy. Also, one more thing, like things like weatherization, electric vehicle charging programs, maybe behavioral programs. I'm not sure CPS needs to be paying for this. Perhaps maybe we could give this money back to the CPS customers through rate reductions or a rate change. Thank you.
Peter? Turn the mic.
Peter Onofre. Thanks for the presentation. Excellent work. I'm glad you were able to bring something back at this meeting. As mentioned, we didn't have some of us didn't have the opportunity to share the initial recommendation at our last RAC meeting. I sent this recommendation out to the entire RAC, but I wanted to go ahead and go over it with us today. And it's my overview. It's of a recommendation. It's based on, and I'm saying based on the Frontier Energy Assessment of 2021 and the Brattleboro Assessment and Peer Utility Benchmarking of 2022, the STEP program has been and is currently is a cost-effective energy efficiency strategy. After much inquiry, research, and prayerful deliberation, I support extending the program strategy with a restructured program. In my opinion, the question of who pays for it and who benefits from it is the premise of a restructuring of the program. The complex issue of the cross-subsidization, the funding of the program, and the type of programs provided needs to be specifically and transparently addressed. I recommend transitioning the program focus to exclusively serve low to moderate income LMI customers. This would require evaluating each program of the current STEP portfolio. Evaluation will identify programs that provide the greatest energy efficiency cost savings to LMI customers, as well as maximum capacity cost savings. According to the recent Brattleboro assessment, ensuring that the programs reduce future capacity costs can imply lower rates for all customers. The restructured program would develop a target strategy to prioritize the highest energy burden census tract customers. The strategy would utilize case studies, models, pilot program studies to increase and document the program's success. The restructured program would be evaluated annually. And now, as far as the funding, I've got two questions. One for Mr. Lynn. I wanted to ask a question about the STEP, but I'm going to go ahead and finish, and then I'm going to ask a second question about the funding, so I won't have to come back and ask both questions. So proposed short-term restructured funding program solution. I recommend that CPS and the City of San Antonio prioritize seeking energy efficiency infrastructure funding made available by the recent federal infrastructure bill. These funds could be used to offset and supplement the customer costs related to funding the restructure program. Securing this funding would also serve to potentially offset or reduce the pending increases to customers over the next 4 years. I'm talking about the rate increases. Other funding program restructure options should be explored to extend this potential benefit beyond the short term. Two primary federal programs identified are the Weatherization Assistance Program and the Energy Efficiency Block Grant Program. The restructure program could serve as the restructure program, what is currently the STEP narrative, would serve as a federal infrastructure funding project initiative model. This project would focus on increasing energy efficiency through tried and true programs and providing energy burden relief to residents in the most impoverished major city in the United States. This is also an opportunity for us to utilize this funding to incorporate a program assessment model that provides data to inform current and future RAC recommendations on low-income rate increase impact solutions, partnered with the Department of Energy, the National Renewable Energy Lab projects, and would enhance the future funding opportunities. So I wanted to start with my question concerning the funding. Rudy, I know you had referenced you had a great trip, SA to DC. And based on that proposal, with STEP being a narrative, the history of STEP and the great success that it's been for 12 years, and being able to pull down some of that federal infrastructure money, when you went to DC, what was the feedback on the energy efficiency programs that we were seeking to bring to San Antonio?
Yeah, we submitted a $2 million request for federal funding yesterday, as a matter of fact, through Congressman Castro's office, specifically for weatherization. So, that's through just the normal budget process, but there will also be block grant funding, as you stated, through the DOE that we will chase as well. So, anything that we can bring back to San Antonio to do more of this based on whatever I can get 3 votes from the board to approve. Again, you deal with the utility burden, issue in our community 2 ways. You either restructure rates to charge lower income folks less, or maybe you help them lower their usage so that they can save dollars and use those dollars for somewhere else. So for somebody that's in the high 20-30% range, which we have some of here in San Antonio, you got to kind of deal with it from both ends, usage, and the rate side. So, Peter, to answer your question, yeah, we're chasing some federal dollars.
And thank you. Thanks for the support in that. I know that getting good information on what we've spent and what we're planning to spend, and this question to Rick regarding the previous funding percentages that were presented by Brattle concerning low income and, well, let's just say the LMI and the non-LMI customer from the previous program. Of the 70 million, 50 million were non-LMI and the 20 million were LMI. And one of the Brattle presentation recommendations initially back in August was that we consider that balance shifting. And of course, I'm asking for a total shift, of course, but the presentation has a variety of LMI, non-LMI. Can you quantify that in this presentation as far as right now what you're thinking the percentage would be? I know that's still a work in progress, but where is it now that you see the percentage of that?
I don't have a percentage off the top of my head, but yes, to your point, up to now, weatherization has been our major commitment, right, to low income. I think what we're showing here is that we would potentially bring in other low income programs on top of that. So things like I talked about the multifamily weatherization programs targeted to low income customers and areas, and so it would be more than, again, I mean, nothing's been decided. These are, scenarios that we're showing. But yeah, I mean, I think we understood that. We saw that in the report, and that's some of the feedback we've had is to focus on the equity piece.
And just one last observation regarding, and Corey, this might be more related toward, not that I'm not looking for an answer right now, but just an observation on what that would do to the budget if we were to pull down funds, and let's say in a year and a half, we've got funds that have been allocated to this program, being able to incorporate them into our current rate structure, the way that we're designed right now is through and I know we're going to be more transparent with this, through the fuel adjustment. And there's a percentage that everyone pays, and we can see who pays for it, the cross-subsidization component. Being able to pull that money in, what would be the process for that? And again, just putting it out there, I know it's going to be something we're going to work on, but how the monies can be allocated specifically toward the LMI or to increase or to subsidize what's already being done or to eliminate, in other words, to take away the cost. Those are going to be the 2 equations that we need to consider, and how difficult that would be to do, to be able to incorporate a reduction in the costs to the ratepayer by supplementing those funds for 2 years, 3 years, however we factor it in, versus adding more program funding. I think that's the equation that we'll need to look at and again, I'm just looking at how the ratepayer I go back to what CPS did with the ADP, great work to be able to modify that impact on the low income. And I think we have that opportunity here when those funds, and I believe that we can, with this program, pull down the funds and apply it to minimize the rate increase. But those are my last comments. Thank you for this. I'm sorry about going over a little long.
It's all right. We had some folks that granted you time. Go ahead. Next, on down around.
Hello, my name is Andy Castillo. I'm for keeping the program, and I really like the option 2. I know of many people, including myself, that have benefited from this program, and through the community I live in, and through family members myself, the thermostat program has benefited us or me personally, and elderly people that I know, and people that would have never gotten an electric or digital thermostat themselves. The idea that taking this away and just making profit off of people that have homes that were built or were designed to be not what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of the homes in my community were built in the 1920s, which allowed air to flow through them because there was no AC back then. So the idea of weatherizing these homes to keep the heat or the AC in is a big burden to a lot of the people that live in our communities like this. So this program is a benefit for a lot of people. A lot of the elderly people that I know, would rather just open windows and not turn on their AC, even though that puts their lives in danger, especially since temperatures are getting over 100 degrees more often nowadays. So it's things like this that, I would like you guys to realize that it helps our communities, our people that can't afford, stuff like this. And what else was I going to say? Sorry, got a little winded. But some of the stuff that we had talked about in the CAC about future ideas, the idea of putting a electrical ground in some of these older homes that were built with no ground for EV cars in the future is another thing I think that should be considered later or in the future. I think that's about it for right now. Thank you.
Nita?
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much. First, I want to say thank you to Rick for a great presentation. I especially kind of want to go to and talk specifically about slide 9. I think that I think what's important for me is that I know that we all have our opinions and our feelings, but if we look at the math, the financial impacts are very clear. The way I read that slide, and I want some feedback from CPS, is that we're either going to invest this money now, $250 million in option 1, or we're going to have to spend $475 million down the road because that's what our avoided fuel and capacity costs are. So, and that's just one example. So I think the case is very clear that energy efficiency is a cost-effective strategy. Second, that it's also going to reduce our market risk because energy efficiency will be a fixed cost moving forward. And then also it's serving our customers who are the shareholders of CPS Energy. So again, my recommendation is that we, and I think it's very clear, I think the math works out. We have to continue to invest in energy efficiency, invest in the shareholders of CPS Energy, and try to reduce our market risk by making this investment today.
Thank you. Rick, thank you for the great presentation as well. Did you want to have some time to comment from what Anita had to say, or? I don't want to, yeah, okay. So again, thank you. Again, thank you for the very good presentation, and I totally agree with Anita that the investment needs to be made. The question is option 1, option 2 for that investment. But a couple of things I did want to say is that one of the things I do hear from customers, if CPS is a business, being a business, we, the customers, could go somewhere else for competition, but there's no other option in San Antonio. So when we think about CPS being a business and we're encouraging people not to buy our goods, people do not have another choice. So I think we have to think about the business model when it comes to CPS in a different way, or at least expand our thinking of what a business model is. The second thing is for the comment about, I'm a nurse. I've been in health and healthcare for a number of years. As a public health nurse, I try to put myself out of business by promoting health in the community and instructing people how to take care of themselves. So I haven't gotten there yet, but I'd like to not have to have a job. But unfortunately, we're still at that point where it's needed. And then the other thing in terms of weatherization and for the homes that you spoke about, Andy, yes, it's very, very much needed. And I think the movement to multi-family homes is essential for San Antonio because of the housing cost and the tremendous cost of buying a home. We're going to see more and more renters. I think there was something in the San Antonio report today, or the Express News, about rent costs exploding across Texas as well. So I do appreciate CPS looking at that because I think that will be important as we go down the line. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Michael Kennick. First, I'd like to say that I agree with Peter and Andy, especially along the lines of the issues of concentrating on the energy burden issues and targeting these programs towards the people that need it the most and not just blanketing these programs to everybody. I think that's critical. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the numbers here on slide 9. The first one that I have a question about is the demand reduction and how that's really being calculated. In other words, how much of that demand reduction would have taken place even if there wasn't one of these programs? For example, if we're subsidizing people putting in more efficient air conditioning, well, a lot of those people are putting in air conditioning because their old one broke, and they'd probably purchase that more efficient air conditioner anyhow. So I don't know that we should be taking credit for that demand reduction when they would have done it anyhow. Yeah, we're helping them out here, but I want to know how much of this demand reduction is a result of the program that wouldn't have taken place without the program. Because I think a lot of this demand reduction, people would have made those smart decisions with or without a program. And I think that's important to know.
Okay, yeah, if I can address that. So when we measure demand reduction for any program, we measure against what is the existing code at that time. So air conditioning is a good example. Air conditioners have become more efficient over time, and so the standard has risen. We don't rebate the standard, right? We require something above and beyond what is required. And we only take credit for the difference, right? Because to your point, the natural efficiency just from technology evolving would have happened anyway. And so I think that we have to be very careful about that, and I think we are in all of our methodologies to only count the things that would not have happened without an incentive other's. Likewise,
you're suggesting that people wouldn't buy more efficient air conditioners?
No.
I would.
What I'm saying is that we only rebate for buying an air conditioner that is beyond what is required, which I think is an important difference. You have to be, eventually, you're going to have to buy a more efficient air conditioner because that's all there is. But that's not what we rebate. We rebate above that.
And I get that. What I'm saying is a lot of those purchases would probably have taken place even if you didn't have the program. So taking credit for it through the program is a little bit of a false credit.
Yeah. If you look at the difference in pricing, I think most people would not spend the money. Most folks who do it because there's,
I don't know. I'm a smart consumer, and I look beyond just that price. I look at my savings in the future. I still need that slide up, please.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
that's my first point.
Okay.
If we can bring that slide back up, please. Slide 9. Okay, yeah, okay. So, and then the other question I have here, or comment I have here, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record because I keep saying the same thing, and you keep not, either you don't know how to do it or you can't do it, but when you talk about system benefits and you say 475 million in lifetime avoided fuel and capacity costs. First of all, for clarity, capacity cost is what it would cost us to build new power plants, correct?
Correct.
So again, the avoided fuel cost ultimately ends up being a savings by the person who installs the new energy efficient item. They get a reduction. If my neighbor becomes more fuel efficient, I don't get a reduction in my monthly bill based on his fuel reduction. So that piece is clearly a benefit to those individuals that take advantage of the program, which is only about 5% of our customers. The capacity cost, where CPS saves money, now we all benefit from that, and I get that. But you need to break this out so that we understand where the real benefits are going, because you show these great ratios, but the real ratio we should be concerned about as CPS, as a city, is that avoided capacity cost. I continue to ask for you to break this out, and you continue to bundle them together, so we really don't know what the true benefit to just CPS is in those avoided capacity costs.
Yeah, so let me clarify that. So you're right. So if I put in a more efficient air conditioner, my bill is going to go down, right? And so I have bill savings as a customer because my bill's going to go down. That's not what's here, right? What's here is CPS has to generate that power to serve me. And if you have that more efficient air conditioner, now I don't have to generate the power. And so there is savings to CPS from not having to generate power. And that's the fuel piece that we're talking about here, and the capacity piece, because you also have to have capacity to serve that load. And so I see your point, but that's not what we're, the energy savings, the bill savings to the customer, it would be a separate.
I don't know that I follow that logic, because that fuel savings ultimately gets passed on to the customer in the fuel part of his bill. So ultimately, each individual resident pays their portion of the CPS's fuel cost.
Can I just weigh in here? What Rick's trying to say is, if you look at, let's just say the 265 megawatts, if part of the value proposition with STEP, which we have been validating with the city for year after year after year after year on, is that I'm not going to have to go out and either buy 500 megawatts from an existing plant on the market or build 500 megawatts worth of gas or whatever we build to serve that next iteration of load that we've avoided here. When we don't have to build that next power plant and run gas through that next power plant and run that gas through the fuel cost element of your bill that impacts all customers, when we have avoided that capacity because we didn't have to build the plant or buy the capacity, everybody benefits. And that's separate and apart from the energy savings benefit to the customer.
I still don't understand why you can't break out and tell me what the capacity savings is. In other words, what are we avoiding the cost of building a new plant?
Yeah, let me talk to the team. We'll see what we can do to get that.
I
Get that
keep
for you.
asking,
Okay.
I've been asking for this since
We'll try to get it
August.
to you. I heard you. Okay,
Yeah.
I heard you.
Okay. If we have one more minute, I'd like to go back to slide 6. Okay, so what I keep hearing, one of the things that I'm hearing here, besides these two options, is really that the option is, should we have a program, should we not have a program? One of the things that we don't seem to talk about that I think should at least be a consideration is, I love the idea of a program. I'm just wondering if it's a program that the city shouldn't run, and why CPS would run such a program. I understand it helps save CPS from building new capacity, but running this type of program isn't a core competency of the utility. The utility's core competency is producing and delivering energy. So while I believe in these types of programs, I'm wondering if the city shouldn't run a program like this and then pay for that out of their city transfer fees. And again, target to certain people. Because when we look here, right now, we're putting this added charge in people's bills which totals up to $50 million a year for option one. It's essentially a 3% tax on the ratepayers, and only 5% of the ratepayers are using these programs. And then on top of that, the city's already getting 13% in the city transfer, which for a municipal utility is a little bit high. It's probably about 5% higher than the typical municipal utility. And don't get me wrong, I think the city should have that transfer money. But my thought is, we're taxing people 13% with the city transfer, you're taxing them another 3% here. Let's eliminate this from CPS, let the city run a targeted program, and they can pay for that program out of their transfer fees. That's at least something to consider, and I haven't heard that sort of discussion. Thank you.
Before the people over here get nervous in their seat, we will give you time to talk, okay? Don't get nervous, and don't squiggle around on me. We're gonna, no happy hour. Here we go. Anne Marie, go ahead.
Rick, thank you for all the information. I'm going to say the two simple things first, which is the subsidy, the solar subsidies. You know, when those started, the reason they were put in place, it is time to reevaluate. You know, I think that's outlived its original use. And you don't keep doing something the same way over and over again just because you've done it before, right? The industry's changed, everything's changed. The STEP program, I agree, something should still remain in place, and that's what we're talking about, you know, are the different options. So I'm still interested to hear more. Mike, I want to address something that you just said, which is about the purchasing of a new air conditioner when you need it. Okay, I've done that. I consider myself a pretty savvy consumer. I successfully installed a solar array that broke even in 2 years, you know? So I think I know how to do figures and how to shop. And I'm going to tell you, when it came time to do the air conditioner purchase, it was exactly what Rick said. You know, I could not afford the difference in the cost on the higher price. So I went with the basic standard, which was way better than my Tombstone, was what they used to call my air conditioner. It was a much better percentage because, as he said, the standard has come up. That baseline is much higher than what many people currently have. But I could not afford to go into the next thing. And my focus for me on all of the energy efficiency things that I was putting into place in that home was for me to be able to age in my house, okay? So that's my viewpoint. And that's why I look at these things. How can I age in on a set income when I get to that place and maintain my home? So, thank you.
Wayne. Anaqua.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So I am... No, I can't. I am for the weatherization program to continue and to transform as well. I think someone can check me on this, maybe Rudy can, but I doubt CPS will go bankrupt by conserving energy. And I think I'm going to use a word that several people may have alluded to earlier, and it involves around equity, and it is about poor people. These communities that we're talking about are poor, they're impoverished, and many of them come from generational poverty lineages. And we suffer from all of these illnesses in society because of colonization. And so every entity that profits off colonization, I think owes the community back something. And I think if CPS cares about the communities that were decimated in the wake of colonization, then they will expand and promote programs for these communities in a way that whatever comes in the future doesn't take away from from these communities, but instead adds to what they can benefit from. Energy conservation, in particular, I wonder what the poor community in San Antonio would lose in terms of what this program restructuring would look like. Things like electric vehicle charging programs, things like solar power energy. These are things that a lot of poor people in the community cannot or will ever afford in their lifetime. And so if we care about equity, we must center these communities and make sure that they are the ones that are primarily benefiting from this program. And that is what I have to say. Thank you.
Dee Dee.
Thank you. I think I asked this in the last meeting, but I'm going to bring it up again as we talk about the 410 megawatts of incremental demand reduction. Does that represent peak demand or non-coincident peak?
That is non-coincident.
Okay. Wouldn't it be better to focus on winter and summer peak demand, which is when energy costs are the highest? And I think that was one of the recommendations by a couple of groups when it came to the demand reduction.
That has been Optimal Energy's suggestion. We can certainly translate that to a coincident peak number and show that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the one challenge, and we've shared this with Optimal Energy, is that when you move to a coincident peak metric, we're going to be very focused on summer, and a lot of the things that would help, weatherization and other programs like that are actually non-coincident peak type measures like insulation. And so I think that, it might actually not achieve the goal of what they're trying to get us to do. So that was our perspective, and but certainly we can add the number if you'd like, and Rudy may have a comment to that.
Well, the only comment, Dee Dee, that I have is we've done a really good job for coincident peak focus programs of our demand response program. We've got about 250 megawatts, give or take, of demand response capability in San Antonio. We don't have the industrial load that a Houston or Dallas has, but for the load that we do have, we've been real effective at working with our customers because CPS Energy's got 250 megawatts of access to demand response, which includes the thermostat program, which also helps. What the rest of the state of Texas, or at least in ERCOT, has 350 megawatts of demand total for all of those other areas that have industrial loads that aren't really pushing demand response programs for, probably the reasons, that we talked about, wanting to sell more power, right? We're getting access to every bit of demand response that we have, and we're still pushing. So I think, and there's a financial benefit to demand response because we can participate in the market by bidding that power in that we know we can get, and there'd be a financial benefit to our customers that we share with both all of our customers and those specific customer that lowers their demand. So even if STEP goes away, we will continue demand response and move it over to our power generation function because there is a financial benefit to our system there. So we do both. We just do demand response as kind of our primary CP reduction program, and everything else to benefit energy savings, if you will.
Okay, I would think about that. I have some more questions. Or actually, first I'd like to say on future programs, and I think this is kind of touches on what a couple people have said, that I'd like to see some specific metrics or goals in there to help low-income customers. And let me see here, get some more. I'm happy to see, the multifamily units being included in this. I hope that we will also include, think about multifamily units when we go back to rate design. On solar, I'm still not understanding, this is back from the Brattle presentation, because I don't think there really was a good explanation on the PAC and the TRC tests for solar. You know, one said, you know, the cost of the benefits of solar outweighed the cost of solar, and then vice versa. So with that being said, like, each test came out with different results. Y'all just totally scrapped solar, knowing that solar, like, and we'll consider the costs. You know, solar would help us in our decarbonization goals.
Yeah, if I can just explain on the Brattle report and what they were saying. I mentioned that we pay 8% of the cost of a system through the rebate. We end up paying 8% of it. So from our perspective, you know, we get the benefit of 100% of the capacity and the energy that is generated, but we only pay 8% of the cost, right? And so from that perspective, it's very cost effective, and that's what we've always reported in our reports. When you look at the utility perspective, what Brattle did was they looked at it from the other side, which is, if I'm paying 100% of the cost, what does it look like to me? And what, in a nutshell, what they're saying is, if you're a customer and you can do energy efficiency or smart thermostat or all these other things, solar is not at the top of the list in terms of, because it's expensive compared to the other things that you could do first. But that's always been the story, is you do energy efficiency first, that's most cost effective, and then solar can just supplement that.
Okay, got it. Couple more questions. How much money is left in STEP that will run through the end of July? And if there's money left over, what do you do with it? And has STEP always spent more money on commercial energy? I don't remember energy efficiency than residential. So to your question about money being left over, no, I mean, we've managed the budget very closely to get us to July. So there's not, and the other thing is, you know, it's a cost recovery program, so we spend the dollars, right, and then we recover them over time. So it's not like there's a bucket of money sitting there. You know, we expect we will spend, you know, the full allocation by July 31st. Okay, great. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Rick, there was a second part of that question that you didn't answer. If you had to break down what we spend between residential programs and commercial programs, what would that breakdown look like?
I have it, but it's at the table I was looking through here.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that. I'll grab it and we'll come back to that.
Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just, one of the things that's come out from the conversation, I think is one of the questions I had, is I kind of wish there was a clearer connection between slide 6 and slide 9. Because on slide 6, you know, you have the costs, and, you know, they're borne by the ratepayers, so it's not, CPS is not literally making an investment, the city's not making an investment, the state's not, the customers are making the investment, okay? That's who gets it, and that's fine if that's what the community wants to do. Whether it's $30, $40, which I guess is another 3% on top of the $385 that we heard about recently, relating to the winter problem and whatever else might happen over the next 5 years, or the $18,000 that the big customer has to pay. And that's fine, and I think energy efficiency is a good thing and should be funded in some way. But I think it would be more persuasive to the ratepayers if you could say, for this $40, you know, you're getting an X% return, just like when you buy the solar panels or the more efficient air conditioner, rather than sort of trying to piece all these things together to figure out, you know, is this a good investment? The extra rate I'm going to pay, is this a good investment from me, the ratepayer standpoint? I know it's great for people who are taking advantage of these programs, but I'm just talking about it from the ratepayer standpoint. And the other thing too, in trying to evaluate, you know, but for the cost to the ratepayers, I assume, you know, you'd rather do option 2 because, you know, you get bigger benefits and you have the same overhead, you know, the same administrative costs in both. If there wasn't such a thing as the rate differential, you'd rather do the bigger program. But it just made me think about which of these categories, how would you prioritize these categories? It sounds like maybe, you know, demand response is quite effective. How do these things rate in terms of their effectiveness, weatherization, energy efficiency, demand response, all the rest of it. Are they all sort of, equally worth doing, or are some more effective than the other if you had to make some choices here? That's it. That's enough for me for now.
Okay. To that question, ultimately, and this may not be the answer you're looking for, but ultimately it's a balancing act, right? Because, certainly we measure cost effectiveness for every program, and DR, Rudy spoke to DR, it's a very cost effective program. But weatherization, which is less cost effective, has a lot of value in the community. So, I don't know that there's a single number we can point to and say, that's the magic bullet and we should do just that. And then that's what we did in sort of building these scenarios, was trying to balance all of these priorities. I do want to go back to the question about how much we've spent on residential and commercial. This is just the energy efficiency portion. So since the beginning of time, we've spent $175 million on commercial energy efficiency and 114 on residential. And as for, why? Well, our rebates for commercial projects tend to be larger because they're much, much bigger projects versus, light bulb replacements and air conditioning are usually, hundreds of dollars and smaller rebates. Hopefully that was.
Is that over 5 years or what?
No, that is from the beginning of STEP, 2009 to 2022, so the life of it.
Thank you.
And I'm going backwards, right?
It's still a little murky to me how all this math works out, saving people money, because we're paying for it anyway. It seems to me like you could put something real in this program by, instead of guessing about how much money you're saving for future energy costs, to allocate some real cash, even though customers continue to pay, for an accumulation on the next time you actually need to build a plant. Now, it seems like that would be very easy to understand, whereas this, I mean, it's pretty murky here that, it's doing what you say it's doing. And even the Brattle report is pretty murky about, what makes sense and what doesn't. So the customers are actually paying for this. CPS continues to take credit for it, but it's not them. And so if you had a plan where you're actually planning for the future, instead of just taking whatever happens in the future when you actually need it, then you could actually tell customers what's going to happen and what you have reserved, a savings account, so to speak, for the future contingencies. The way it's going now, I mean, I'm not convinced that these numbers are really doing what you say they're doing. And, I'm not sure that you could prove it, or not sure that I could prove it, but it just doesn't seem like it's like a program that makes total sense. I can understand doing things for the lesser income population of the city, and I don't have a problem with that. But again, you're asking customers to pay for that. If it's such a good idea, for instance, why didn't CPS pay for it without charging us, in the STEP program? I'd like to hear an answer to that first before I pass this microphone. Everything's such a good idea, cost savings, cost benefit analysis. Why don't you just pay for it? Don't ask us to pay for it.
Dana, let me respond to that. I've heard you say customers, we take credit, customers pay. Customers pay for everything that we do. We don't exist without a penny coming through the door that you control by what you don't use a kilowatt hour, you don't pay for the kilowatt hour. You use a kilowatt hour, you pay for the kilowatt hour. The entirety of how we manage our portfolio has always been balanced and diversified to protect our customers from risk. Part of that diversification strategy, we were all gas once upon a time. Now we're not. We've got gas, we got coal, we got nuclear, we got landfill gas, we got solar, we got wind. We do it all that is accessible to us in our market. including energy efficiency. Energy efficiency has been a small but meaningful part of our diversification strategy as it relates to how we plan for the future. So everything we do comes from our customer. You know, you keep saying that. I just want to be clear. You know, utility dollars are not taxpayer dollars. We are a public utility. We provide a service. Our customers pay for us to capably provide for that service. Energy efficiency has been part of the equation. We are presenting our board with an option. We have a program, we don't have a program. If we have a program, what scale would you like it? And what goals are you going to hold us accountable to? All the things that Rick is putting up there are, you know, are standard validation calculations that our owner regulator, the city of San Antonio, has looked at and said, yes, we agree with that approach. In order for us to approve your funding after the fact, we spend it, and if the city thinks we didn't spend it wisely, then we have to take that out of whatever budget our customers allow us to have on an annual basis. But that has never happened. Rick, have we ever gotten costs declined from the city based on a thought that we didn't reasonably manage this program? I mean, that's why it exists. That's why these calculations exist, is for the city to hold us accountable. So the question here is, you don't want a program, then fine. You know, that's your input. If you want a program, then that's your input. But this has been part of a well-defined diversification strategy that we just have to decide whether we're going to keep doing or not. But you cannot agree with the numbers. I respect that. You cannot agree with doing a program. I respect that too. But we've been doing this a long time, and it's an award-winning program that other utilities have modeled after because it's balanced, it's verified, and it benefits the entirety of our customer base from a residential and commercial standpoint. So I hear you, but every dollar we bring in is our customer dollars that we're responsible for delivering a service to. So, I mean, that would be my answer to your question.
Dana, anything else? Okay.
Hi, Rudy. One question before I start, and that is, how many years are we amortizing URI over, 20 or 30?
Well, it's 25, but it'll likely be something less than that because every year we got new customers coming on, which means that
Okay.
those dollars are spread over. So it'll probably be somewhere between 22 and 25 years.
Okay. With that in mind, I just bring up the fact that first, I really think that if there's one energy-saving program that CPS has ever come up with, it is the incentive to put in digital thermostats in houses. Can't be better. To the extent that weatherization is done, I agree with Mike that I think that that's a city program and not necessarily a CPS program. But to incentivize thermostats in houses, we just can't get better than that. Because I felt when CPS has put the button up and suddenly I've said, gee, it's a little warm in this house right now. Oh, yeah, it's at 79 right now, okay. And I'm sure everybody in this room has had that same thing, right? And more power to you. That's the way it goes. I mean, even if you don't save from the first minute on, but you've saved more than we would have saved otherwise. So I think that that's an integral part of STEP, or call it whatever you want to call it. But I would also say that if we did nothing other than that, and we took that cash and we put it toward what we owe with Storm Uri, it wouldn't take too many years of doing that. I mean, 10, maybe 15 at the most, and suddenly we've paid off with our own dollars what we owe, because we owe it. Sorry, we owe it. We're going to have to pay it. It's $1 billion. At $70 million a year, it doesn't take you too long to get there. And I think we ought to consider that when we start saying, well, here's CPS candy to hand out to everybody, because where only 5%, I think we said, of the city CPS customers enjoy this program, 100% of CPS ratepayers will enjoy the lower rate if we were to do away or pay off the capital that we have to, the expense that we have with Winter Storm Uri, which is, I don't know how many dollars a month. It's $2.50, maybe $5.
$1.26 for residential.
$1.26.
It's something more for commercial.
It's not a whole lot, but it's there, and it's there for the next 25 or 20 years, depending on what Rudy said. That's my input.
Yeah, we made it.
Man.
Go.
Okay. The last time we ran out of time. We were talking about improving the STEP program, and I had a suggestion of, well, first off, what happened after the meeting is I got an email from the City of San Antonio Development Services Department that they were updating their property maintenance code. So in that, I'll say, why doesn't CPS and the Weatherization Program also coordinate? That way, the cost of the weatherization could go back into the code. You talked about rebates only happen when you do something above the code. Right now, as it stands, and you're adding multifamily housing, I see it as we're subsidizing property improvements for people who own, usually multifamily housing, somebody's renting. The renter has to be a low income or moderate income to qualify for the program. But the property owner is the one that gets the long-term benefit because the city ends up improving that property for him. And so it's great to be in the rental business, and it's great to rent one time to somebody that is an LMI that qualifies for the city or for the CPS to do their property improvements for them. So if we improve the code, now by code, we can get the property owner to do that. As well as if the property owner can't afford to improve the property, at that point, I think CPS ought to do a loan, a low percentage loan to him, as far as you're going to have to improve the property, but it's going to cost you this much. You're going to have to repay CPS for what we had to do to your property so that somebody could live there, somebody else can afford to live in your property. So that's what we're doing. And so that's what I had in a nutshell. Did I keep it under 2 minutes?
You keep going. You
No,
got time from last week, buddy. Go
No,
ahead.
no, and I do agree with Mike where no business can ask his customers to buy less. And in CPS, I still agree with everybody else where they're saying, or several of us are saying, let's plan on getting that new generator in there. We need to do that. Okay, I yield my time back to whoever wants it.
Okay, thank you very much. I just guess for the record, I better give my input to, first of all, it needs to be a set amount approved by the council and put in the rate, not the fuel adjustment. The focus, I believe, needs to be on strictly low-income individuals in severely depressed areas. I think we've held up programs as opposed to figuring out who we're going to try to help and what situation we're going to have. We got to turn that around and figure out who we're going to help and how we can help them. Al's right, the multifamily thing, we struggle with that many times on council. It's very hard to do that. Maybe they can figure out a way to include people that are in multifamily, but it is very difficult, and we need to recognize that. So we focus on the customer, not the program, and we develop something that does have cost effectiveness or something that we can determine doesn't have cost effectiveness. I'm very concerned, as many of you are, about how we accumulate the cost savings for this. I believe if we focus on low-income customers, we do something like appliance replacement or winterization that's effective, collect that cost on a monthly basis. We should have monthly feedback about what we're saving, because we'd also ask these folks to put a demand response meter in their homes. So we help them winterize because they can't. I agree with Michael. I think most people that are fairly capable can do the things they need to do to save. We got to help the most disadvantaged. And if they, then we help them, they put a thermostat that we can adjust so we can do the coincident peak that Dee Dee's talking about and manage that. Okay, that's all I have. We got a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back here for the second part. Thank you. Okay, let's take our seats, get this done. See ya. Okay, this second section is a continuing discussion on our generation planning and our portfolio mix. I personally want to thank Femi for leading this. Unfortunately, he had a business meeting out of town that he could not miss, and he has texted his comments to Michael, and Michael's going to carry this part forward. He has a very good committee. Let's see, we had Dee Dee, Anita, Michael Sanchez, who am I missing? Peter Onfrey, I guess. That was it? Did I miss somebody? Anyway, Michael, if you come up, kind of give your report. Now, let's put this in context. What we did first is just kind of look at the historical trends, try to figure out where we were in our portfolio mix, and then we're going to pretty quickly in the next meeting, which, as I mentioned to you earlier, is going to be the fourth Thursday. If I didn't mention that earlier, I mentioned again the fourth Thursday, fourth Thursday, not third, fourth. And we're going to go over, at that point in time, CPS is going to start talking about their options. They'll flip it in and transition it into their model, which is more of a prospective. This model, in all fairness, has already become prospective because we've already started putting in assumptions and stuff. So we've already started transitioning it. I want to thank Peter and Michael and the other three members for their help on this. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Michael.
Great, thank you. So I will start by reading Femi's comments. He passed on some comments to me, and then I have a few notes with just some additions to what he has, and then I think the other members that were at these meetings, they may want to give a couple minutes of input as well. So Dr. Femi's notes here. Over 2 meetings with CPS Energy staff, March 31 and April 14th, a working group comprised of 6 RAC members conducted an in-depth examination of the generation planning model that CPS Energy staff built for the RAC. The model was built as an Excel spreadsheet according to requirements from RAC Chair Reed Williams, specifically to calculate fuel cost, power purchase agreements costs, ERCOT market purchase cost, and CO2 emissions for 2 generation portfolio scenarios, one historical and one stylized. Just adding my own comments here, I think what he means by stylized is we can adjust the model and look at different scenarios as compared to historical. The model sets an excellent starting point as intended for addressing generation planning issues that have emerged from previous RAC meetings. However, several issues have yet to be addressed. One such issue is plant utilization. As built, the model does not calculate utilization metrics explicitly. CPS Energy staff argues that plants cannot achieve 100% utilization due to downtimes for scheduled maintenance and ERCOT's service capacity requirements for ancillary services. While this argument is reasonable in principle, failure to estimate plant utilization means the RAC would have insufficient objective basis for addressing potential idle plant capacity or otherwise. Moreover, plant utilization metrics are critical to determining future capital expenditure and other necessary costs to meet San Antonio's growing electricity demand. Therefore, we urge CPS Energy to modify the RAC generation planning model to calculate and display annual percentage capacity utilization metrics for every plant in the utilities generation portfolio. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments. And that's the end of Dr. Femi's comments. I didn't put quite as flowing of a statement together, but I have a few notes that I would like to share. Again, as Want to remind people that the primary purpose of these couple meetings that this little subgroup had was really just to get an idea of the inner workings of the model and to get a sense of the accuracy of the model. And sort of skip into the end of what I have, and then I'll come back. I think we did get a sense that the model was a good model. We looked at all of the spreadsheets and formulas and asked lots of questions about assumptions, and we had a sense that it was a good estimated model. But again, models are just estimates. They're not perfect. And I guess part of my conclusion will also be that as we tweak the inputs to the model, the historic output is 100% right on, but as you tweak it, because of assumptions, because of problems in modeling, the further we get away from historic norm, the less accurate the model is. So we have to sort of take it on face value that as we tweak the model and look at what the results are, there are some inaccuracies there, and the further we tweak the inputs away from where we started, the more inaccurate we get. And what we don't know is how big that inaccuracy is. So we have to take these results with a little bit of a grain of salt here. Back to my notes. Remember, just a reminder of what the purpose of this model was. It's a high-level model. We're using it as a simplified planning tool to leverage historical data to illustrate key planning concepts. We're using it to generate discussion on future generation mix possibilities. And that this simulation tool is based on historical data and isn't a forward-looking model. We need to keep that in mind. It's just it's a discussion point. It's not a forward-looking model yet. A few of my takeaways. Again, as with all models, there are a number of assumptions and compromises in the model, so it's not perfect. One of my takeaways is just the idea that the model only captures fuel cost when we're looking at numbers. What it doesn't take into consideration is capital costs for building new plants, or the continued cost of paying the debt on capital of old plants. It's just looking at the fuel costs. So there's other costs involved as we move forward and consider different mixes of generation. Also, one of the takeaways I had was that the way the model works, each day is calculated as a whole. In other words, the cost of a whole day for a particular plant is there, whereas I originally thought the model was breaking down on an hourly basis and recalculating as you calculated things out. But if as you switch things around, there's a little bit of inaccuracy when it's just done as a whole day sum as you pull something out, and not that you would have taken something out of just say the peak area. So there's a little bit of inaccuracy there. But again, overall, I still feel good about the model. Another thing was that in the model, as we remove generation out of the model, if a unit is removed from the model and not replaced by choosing another source, the model defers straight to purchased power. Originally, the model was set up to dispatch the load. In other words, if I pull out a plant, it would look and see where did I have capacity that day and other plants to come up. And then if we ran out of that dispatched capacity, then it would go to purchase power. But the modelers changed course and decided to go to just purchasing new power and not looking at redispatching the plant. So again, that throws a little bit of other inaccuracy in there. But another assumption in there is when part of the charges and part of the costs are ancillary services. The model in this case used the cost of the peak ancillary services charged for the month and wasn't looking necessarily at day to day or hour to hour. They made some assumptions that the peak for that month was fine. And again, these are just little things in the model that, in small increments break away from what might be reality. Another assumption in the model worth mentioning is that each unit was considered either available or not available on a given day, and that planned outages weren't factored into into that. In other words, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. That they didn't necessarily plan scheduled outages into the way they handled a plant either being available or not available on a particular day. Because if they say it's not available, a planned outage you could have put back in if you really needed to, as we shift load generation around in the model. I guess then in conclusion, though, is that, you know, like I said before, I do believe that this model is reasonably accurate for small changes and as we play with it, but it gets less accurate as we make big changes, and we just need to keep that in mind as we utilize this tool. I think our next step is probably to consider looking at some better modeling tools than a spreadsheet, but this was a good first place to start to understand, you know, how things are going to change roughly as we change out some of the generation choices. But I think the next step will be the CPS staff using some of their other modeling tools, and especially coming up with models that are forward-looking, whereas, again, we have to recall that this model was just historic-looking and isn't forward-looking. Thank you. Yeah. Did anyone else, the other members want to? Yeah, sure they did. Okay.
I'm good. I think you pretty much summed up everything for me. I think you pretty much summed up everything from my perspective. Just looking forward to us moving forward with more sophisticated modeling, looking at other types of resources. But appreciate y'all summing that up for me, Michael.
All right. Thank you, Reed, for allowing me to participate in this subcommittee. Initially, at that first subcommittee meeting, I felt as though I was drinking from the fire hose of information and data. And my sincere gratitude goes out to Galen McFadden, Kevin Paulo, and John Kosub for their knowledge and patience as they helped us to understand the assumptions, conceptualizations, and some of the limitations of the simulated results. Thanks also goes out to Ann Kennard, Preba Samawana, and Denise Alvarez for their support during these meetings. Lastly, I would like to thank my fellow subcommittee members, Dr. Femi, Dee Dee, Michael, and Peter, for giving of their time. Once again, to the CPS employees who are at these meetings, thank you for making the complex simple for us. Now, simulation helps organizations make predictions that ultimately reduce costs, increase the quality of service to the customer, improve efficiency of internal systems, and document and archive lessons learned. The simulation models presented to us were of high-level spreadsheets using historical cost sets as the knowns. These costs were demand market purchases, power purchase agreements, and fuel costs of the various generation systems. Data was flowed into the control panel that segregated and aggregated the cost per megawatt hour generated and tons of CO2 emitted per megawatt hour. It is important to note that part of the historical data going into the simulation baseline was at a resolution of individual CPS-controlled generation units by a 24-hour day in the calendar years of 2018 to 2021. Note that in the absence of real historical data, CPS presented standardized data assumptions such as the amount of CO2 emitted from purchased power. The historical demand factor remained the same throughout all of the cases. Know that there is no demand assumptions accounting for future/anticipated numbers of human migration to the CPS service area, nor the increasing demand associated with relatively more electric vehicle use in the future. RAC Chairman Reed Williams' charge to the subcommittee was to make some predictions, determinations of fuel costs, power purchase agreement costs, market purchase costs, and CO2 emissions Knowing that data, a simulation was run using the data assortment known as a transition case. The transition case was comprised of the following simulated conditions: an additional 900 megawatts of solar capacity with power purchase agreements, convert the Spruce 2 coal unit to natural gas, add 500 megawatts of transition green and dispatchable natural gas fuel generators, close the old Brawling natural gas steam units, close Spruce 1 coal unit. Now, the key points of the transition case, as noted in the slides giving us the subcommittee on the 31st of March, the key points were higher estimated residential bills, higher total costs of operation, and lower CO2 emissions. These were the 3 points put out when we ran that simulation, or the modelers ran the simulation. Now, there's amplifying information to these 3 key points, and we can go over that if we have the time. But as far as the outputs, I would like to have seen additional outputs that look at, and I'm not sure if this is part of CapEx, capital expenditures, or O&M, but the simulated disposal cost of old solar generation cells and the frequency of those costs. Capital expenditure of the anticipated and simulated land footprint requirements for solar generation translated into cost per megawatt hour, and another capital expenditure of, I think Michael said it, of new plants. The laying out of the data the laying out of the data was as simple as could be made without complicated nor exceeding the general spreadsheet program's capabilities. With some additional simulated outputs and tweaking of the inputs, I'm satisfied that the simulation design and resolution is sufficient for us as a subcommittee to conduct our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Reed, for allowing for the subcommittee. I also like to thank John Kosip, Kevin Polo, Galen McFadden, and all the CPS employees that were involved in developing the model and supporting our subcommittee. I also like to thank Femi for taking the lead on the subcommittee and my fellow subcommittee members. After being presented with the simulation results at the last RAC meeting of higher fuel costs, increased ERCOT fuel purchases, reduction of emissions, and an average bill increase impact of $4.54, and we really felt we needed to take that with a grain of salt, and we can't, it's not gospel, and that's something that was promoted. We need to be adamant about that, because the subcommittee took a good look under the hood of the model, and to some degree we were able to confirm the quality of the data sources and identify simulation limitations. In my opinion, this model, because of its simple Excel format, provided results with increased degrees of margin for error if complex variables were added. But the results did prove valuable with insights to the benefit of optimization and the continued need for diversified generation mix per portfolio. My major takeaway in the potential risk of resulting fuel costs associated to being more dependent on ERCOT market versus being able to provide energy directly to our customers. Another related concern is the market rate impact of CPS removing generation from the market. Thank you, Reed, for proposing this generation planning simulation. As you say, planning is not a goal, it's an activity, and this activity has been valuable to our charge in generation planning. I look forward to the next model with forecasting and more variables. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I want to, is this working? Okay, sometimes the batteries die. Look, the working group did a great job. This is just a start. This is just trying to get us to focus on a couple of options. It's always hard to start. The hardest thing about planning is starting, and now we've started. So I think it's, again, thank you all very much for doing the work. For me, when I look at it, just a couple of points. Utilization is going to be key. If we can't adjust our portfolio mix and get a better utilization, you're going to get a bad outcome, because we are going to continue, as Rudy said, to purchase solar, and that does put variability in the market, and we don't have all of the if you will, the knobs to turn right now as we increase renewables. But we will get there, and I think they've got a lot of good ideas. At this point, then I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Polo, because from now on it's their game, and the ball is in their hands. Kevin?
Well, thank you, Reed. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be back to talk with you again at this meeting. I have one slide to share today, so shorter than the last presentation I gave. But what I wanted to introduce is the timeline, as we talked about, as Reed has mentioned, it's come up before, but I wanted to talk, kind of give an overview of what to expect really for the rest of the year. So this generation planning discussion that we're talking about, will be a journey over the next few months. This slide is intended to just introduce a timeline of really how we think we would be best in engaging with this committee to move us towards the goal that we've set and the commitment that we've made to bring forth a recommendation, to our Board of Trustees by the end of the year. So as you can see at the top of the slide, we've really broken this down into some major categories, phases, if you will, of the timeline. Kind of going left to right, left to right, I guess. We're really, this meeting and moving into next month, we're in what we call or what I've called the defined goals type stage. This meeting, we spent obviously the time to go through and kind of address the feedback from the subcommittee on the backcast simulation model. Very much appreciate the comments from the group. We valued the time that we got to spend together. I think we appreciated the challenges that everybody made in terms of working through the different parts of the model, how the spreadsheet worked, the different assumptions that we made. So it was as valuable for us, I think, as it was for the subcommittee. At least I certainly hope so. Obviously today we'll talk a little bit here about this timeline. As we look forward then to next month, what we'd like to do is kind of circle back, look at, kind of re-review the feedback that we got from the committee in the February meeting. I think committee had, I think, a really productive dialogue, just kind of going around the table and talking about ideas, concepts, wish lists. So we want to circle back on that and then talk about how we've taken that feedback and really built it into the models or the scenarios that we are proposing to look at. And we'll cover those high-level scenarios and some of the assumptions that we'll be going into as we get into the more detailed analysis and modeling. As you get into the summer, we have that labeled as developed scenarios. That'll be really when the bulk of the modeling and the analysis takes place. So at the beginning of the summer, we hope to be able to just update you on the progress of the modeling, talk about some other topics. Utilization, for example, is one of the comments we had. We'll come back and bring some more data and revisit that topic. As we get to the end of this summer, we expect to have preliminary results to start discussing with the group. That will take us into the fall as we get the final kind of modeling results to pull together. We'll be able to look at the different scenarios, the different options, how they compare to each other, and work through that process to ultimately build towards, providing the feedback, providing the recommendation to the board here in December. I'd like to finish really kind of talking about the two bars that go across the page, right? So you see the first one in gray, labeled as received public input through the RAC. We certainly view these meetings and all the feedback, all the input that we receive as we go around the table and have these discussions, certainly as being very valuable public input. We have the public input session at the beginning of the meeting as we did today. We think those are other opportunities potentially for feedback to be brought forth as we work through the process. And then the blue bar, light blue bar at the bottom, in parallel with all of this, we expect to be able to continue to engage the broader community, working to be active and making sure the community as a whole is aware of what we're doing, how this process is unfolding, the scenarios we're looking at, and continuing that dialogue with the community, really building towards an open house that we expect would happen earlier this fall, again, leading back into the recommendation that will go to the board at the end of the year. So that's really the information I wanted to share, just to walk us through that timeline, and be happy to take any questions.
Where does the CPS budget process fit? I remember last year it was slid
So the question, I think, was about the timeline for CPS budget. I'm looking for Corey, I don't see him. So Chad is there. So Chad, do you want to take this? You want me to, I can give you my best guess, but. So typically, from our budgeting process, we usually do, we start the process, actually it's starting to get kicked off now, with building the assumptions, building the different price estimates, as we look at fuel, the different projects and stuff that the different business units will need to do. That goes into, it all kind of gets brought together early summer, kind of June, July timeframe when we run the kind of the full financial model for the company. And that tells us kind of, as we bring all those inputs together, tells us what everybody wants, if you will, from a capital and an O&M perspective. And then we get to have good conversations with Chad, Corey, and Rudy as far as what we can ultimately afford. And then we start to pare that process down, the project list down to where we finalize the budget based on what we expect from a revenue and what we can actually fund, the following year. So, Rudy, anything you'd like to add?
So I just kind of add a couple things. We're proceeding with the Flex Power Bundle now. That's a strategy we've had in our plan for, a while. It's taken longer than it should have, quite frankly. I'll be signing solar contracts as soon as Kevin gets them in front of me. For the 900 megawatts, we're struggling a little bit tying down the battery storage, and then, having a conversation with the board about the firming capacity. All of that is in our budget. So for the most part, that's covered. The annual budget process really is managing to what we're buying in the market, and what it takes to keep our current plants running. The decisions that you will inform the board on and the board will make, for longer term, that will be one of a couple of 2 or 3 items that we will have to go back to council and talk about in terms of the next rate case process. So, if we're gonna shut down our gas steam units and we're gonna make a decision to close Spruce early and make whatever decisions we're gonna make to replace some of that capacity, with firm capacity and make some technology decisions about the future, all of that will drive a portion of the next rate case. So there's not a lot that's in this budget that will pay for the decisions that we're making. We will have to go back to council and have that conversation.
Any other questions? Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, you just got to wave.
Yeah.
Or say, hey, Reed.
Okay. So I have a question on the continuous awareness. So the bar is throughout the slide here. So does that mean you're doing, or you, CPS, is doing that awareness now, ongoing, or are you just looking at that open house?
Yeah.
Or the open house that you'll have? So just wanted to ask you about the methods of community awareness.
Dr. Cantu, this Rudy, over
yes.
here.
Okay.
So what that block represents, we're in the community every day doing different things. And what we're going to do between now and really throughout this process is add a table at all of our events where we can speak to this generation planning process, get input from anybody who's there that wants to engage with us on this. We've been invited by Dee Dee and some of the environmental folks to the meeting next week. I will be there and answer whatever questions I can. The board has asked me to work through the RAC as our primary, RAC, CAC, and we will do a public meeting once we have more information to share, towards the end of this process, where we'll host kind of a 2-hour open house in this room where folks can come talk to our experts and get questions answered, and then we'll have the board sit down and listen, and probably the RAC and the CAC. We'll invite everybody to come listen to input that anybody has to offer on these issues. So we're going to do what we always do. We're going to engage where it makes sense for us, where we have opportunities, and there will be some formal input that the board has kind of directed me to follow that starts with the RAC and the CAC primarily. But we want to hear what anybody has to say. And when we get to December, just so you're aware, we're going to present the full packet of all the input we've received over the last however many years to the board so that they're making as informed a decision on these issues as they possibly can.
That's great, thank you. I know being out in the community is so important. Just wanted to make one, I don't know if suggestion or comment relative to speaking with certainly the RAC or CAC. We know what you mean by generation planning, but if you're talking to people out in the community and you said generation, so people have a preconceived notion of what generations are, generations of my family and things like that. So I think it might be helpful to think about how we use that phrase. Does it mean what we want it to mean to different people in the community? So is there another synonym for it or another way of saying that?
Yeah, here's what I'll do, because I know there's a lot of you who have community, experience like this. We'll come up with kind of some standard messaging, and we'll run it by the committee.
Okay.
And anybody who has input, we'll be happy
That'd be great.
to get the input
Yeah,
back.
that
Okay.
would be great. Yeah, thank you so much.
Dr. Cantu, we've, early on, we started using the term electric power generation, and it seemed to help people when they'd come talk to us. Yeah, it's just electric power generation. Okay, go ahead, Al.
Okay, being environmentally responsible, I understand that CPS buys energy from solar and wind farms. Who is responsible for the disposal of the equipment at the end of life? Because I would also like to ask for justification of the technologies, for the use of the technologies, because I understand that there's a lot of waste in making the equipment and more waste in disposing the equipment. So where is the benefit there? And I ask this because I keep hearing on different reports in the news where if the U.S. was to go zero emission, globally, it would not make a difference. So why are we going through this exercise?
So several questions, I think, so I'll try to cover them. If I miss any of them, let me know and I'll pick them up. When we talk about solar farms, for example, as you mentioned, ultimate cost of disposal, we generally, when we look at wind and solar, with probably one exception right now, we have bought all of our wind and solar through purchase power contracts. One of the reasons is because of some of the tax advantages that the developers can take advantage of that we can't. So that by purchasing it through a contract, we're still able, the developer takes advantage of the tax credits. That ultimately translates into lower purchase power costs that we can pass on those savings to our customers. So that said, we don't typically own those farms. So the cost of the production, the cost of the disposal would fall to the developer who's actually the owner-operator. Our commitment, if you will, is just to pay for the power that's produced. Every megawatt hour that's produced, we buy that. And cost of owning and operating is passed on to, or it's not passed on, it's held with the developer.
Like in the solar, in the nuclear that we have, I know that because we are part owner of that, we have to have X amount of dollars set aside for retirement of that plant. So do the solar people and the wind people have to do the same thing? I mean, if and maybe, should I even care that they do or don't? Because it's them, not us. But there again, we're being environmentally responsible.
I would say a couple thoughts there. Ultimately, it is their responsibility. From my opinion, from a business case, a business perspective, you would need to include that in kind of how you're building your total capital cost, right? Or total cost of operation, the lifetime of constructing the facility, what it's going to take you to operate and maintain it every year, and ultimately what it's going to take you to dispose of it at the end of life. So that's should be built into their business case. At least that's how I would do it, if I were owning and operating it. You brought up the nuclear case. It's a very specific example. There are specific Nuclear Regulatory Commission requirements around that. So to your point, as an owner of that, we have an obligation to ensure we have dollars set aside for that ultimate decommissioning of that facility. I'm not aware that there's similar requirements from a wind and solar perspective. We certainly can confirm that, but I think ultimately it falls to the owner-developer. Our obligation stops really at paying for the purchase, or the power that's produced. That's what we have the obligation to buy. You asked a few other questions. I'm not sure that I hit them all.
They were all there. I mean, you know, and why, if the U.S. goes to zero emissions and it doesn't make a difference, why are we doing that?
Al, from just a layman here, until we get new technologies, I don't think we can do it. What we're trying to do here is between now and 2028, when we have some big capital requirements to keep some things going, is trying to get in a position so we can quickly access those new technologies that could take us to zero emissions. And so I don't think anybody here is looking at jumping off the cliff on this. I know I'm not. So, Councilwoman Viagran.
Thank you. I want to thank the subcommittee for their hard work. I'm excited about this timeline. What I heard is, especially from Pete, is about the variables, and I would like to see more work done with that, especially when it comes to the technology and what's going to be needed to maintain in this generational planning, how that might impact. Also in the future, if the federal government comes down, very similar to what Al was just saying, with zero emissions and some sort of regulations that then are passed on to us because we use a wind farm or a solar farm, I think we need to consider that as a variable. And in agreement with Dr. Cantu, in the dialogue with the community, I think you need to work on that generational planning term, and you need to talk about it in terms of real affordability and the benefits, because I know in my neighborhood with my mom and my aunts, if you ask them to give up their gas stove, or you tell them it's going to be more expensive if you have gas, that's just not going to work for them, because they want to use their gas stove. If you tell people, hey, this is going to help because your children will have less asthma days if we make a transition, these are the conversations we need to have with the community so that they can understand how this is going to impact them in the short term and the long term. Thank you.
I absolutely appreciate that feedback. And I think as we look at this, part of the conversation that I think we'd like to have with this committee, certainly part of the conversation with our board, is ultimately to look at what some of the important driving factors are. I think when we look at it, certainly being able to provide reliable power, affordable power is a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. Another one of those key tenets or drivers is the commitment that we've made as a community to the cap. So, you know, we're looking at that as we look at the different solutions and what that does from an emissions standpoint. So I think all of those are some of the factors that we're looking at as we will look at these different options. And ultimately, those are, I think, the key drivers to make the selection, right? As we look at which of the scenarios we think will fit those drivers the best, that's kind of maybe one way of saying it is that developing the scorecard, right, or that type of approach and how we compare the options against each other to arrive at that optimal or best decision.
Just one quick point, just to keep us on track. There's nothing in what we did in looking at this first pass that wasn't in the Flex Power Bundle 15 months ago. So it's not like we jumped out here. We're just looking at more in depth and more specifically of options that were in the Flex Power Bundle. So I just that question kind of got sent to me over the air, and I wanted to make that point. We're not deviating. We're just trying to get people focused on some of the options. Dana? Oh, Dee Dee, I'm sorry. I thought I saw Dana. We got to put a light on this thing.
That's okay. Do you have an idea yet how many modeling scenarios we're going to run?
We're looking at, I think, a couple of the scenarios we're looking at, you know, is one that would be, when we look at retiring generation, right? We've talked about, and I had a slide, I think, that I showed the board a couple weeks ago, you know, where we're looking at 3,000 megawatts of generation in flux, right? So that's our aging gas steam units, so our 3 Browning units, which we envision to be replaced through the Flex Power Bundle, the 900 megawatts of solar, 50 megawatts of batteries, and then the 500 megawatts of firming capacity. That package kind of addresses the Browning units. Then the rest of that 3,000 megawatts of generation is the 2 Summers units. Those are the other 2 aging gas steam units, and then the 2 Spruce units. So as we look at how to fill in, like I said, out of that 3,000 megawatts of generation, we have, as Rudy said, a Flex Power Bundle in flight to address the 800 megawatts of Browning units. So that leaves us 2,200 megawatts of generation to fill in, if you will. So as we're looking at how you fill that gap or replenish that capacity if it were all to go away, we're looking at, besides talking about converting Spruce 2 to gas, then the rest of it becomes how do we fill in the rest? And so some, I think, likely scenarios that we think there's been interest in is looking at renewables, right, that we add and kind of fill in that capacity need with renewables. Kind of at the other end maybe of the pendulum would be replacing that with dispatchable on-demand generation, likely natural gas-fired. And then I think there's solutions that look more like the portfolio we have today, which is a mix, right? We have a mix of renewables and a mix of dispatchable, controllable generation. And the other thing we want to look at, then some offshoots of that, is what does it look like if we have Save Now or that program, or no Save Now? That changes the load side and how much we need to plan for. And probably another of the scenarios I think that we think would be good to look at, came up I think earlier in the conversation, but what if we end up having to buy our power? Instead of building, what if we do it through contracts, for example? And so there's going to be trade-offs in all of those different scenarios, things that we believe will be very beneficial to the community, things that we think will be challenges for our community, and that's part of what we hope to bring together as part of this conversation. Rudy, is there any, I saw you reaching for the mic, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything.
No, I
there.
think the one thing you didn't cover, Kevin, is there's also technologies out there that we think are promising that we have to model in somehow. If geothermal gets in the right price point that that makes sense and is competitive, then that kind of changes the game on what our options are. And there are other technologies, what we're doing with QuidNet on the hydro storage side, and then there's a lot of storage coming. There's probably 200 megawatts at least on the books right now of storage that's coming. That's not us. It's third party, kind of merchant folks that want to put storage all over San Antonio and really all over Texas. And so you got to factor in, those type of technologies and at what scale you think, they're going to show up and at what price point they're going to be available, and how that compares relative to, the mix that we're planning to. So there are a lot of variables I think we'll have to tweak. I mean, going back to the feedback on the model, and I appreciate you all digging in because that is not fun work. I'm sure that was like a root canal for y'all, going through that data. But models are only good, for the day that you make the model, and the very next day the model changes, right? And so we got to stay within some, parameters of the biggest kind of variables that are going to drive our decision points on what the future looks like. And we're going to do our best to try to take the feedback you gave us on the model we built and make sure our future casting models factor those things in. We talk about it all the time. One thing that we don't spend enough time talking about in here that I've spoken to Reed and a couple of y'all about is our generation mix relative to the generation mix of ERCOT. That's a factor that we also have to pay attention to, because if we overbuild on gas or, we go too heavy on one technology over another and it's out of the money, then it's never, that's why some of the utilizations are what they are, because there's more efficient power in the market that is getting called on before our generation is getting called on. So, and there's 40,000 megawatts, give or take, of solar that's on the books right now in ERCOT, not just for San Antonio, but all of the state, all of the portions of the state of Texas, that if they show up, ERCOT takes that first and everything else, falls in line. So there's a lot of really kind of major elements of this that we have to factor in. But, Dee Dee, we're going to run as many models as it takes, you know, where, so that our board and you all and the community feels like we've done our due diligence. You know, I think that's probably 4 or 5 models that make sense. If it's more, then we'll figure out, you know, how many more it needs to be, but I think 4 or 5 models will get us there.
Just to follow up on what Rudy's saying, we took a shortcut in this first one. We connected ourselves to the grid with that next day price. It wasn't the best way, but at least we connected ourselves. And that's going to be one of the hardest problems that we have, is how we connect ourselves with the grid. And frankly, I'm really looking forward to some bright people in here showing us that. Okay, Dana's next.
So, speaking of the staying in step with ERCOT, as Rudy's talking about, and what we do in generation, it seems like it'd be very important to actually model that in, because as you add more unreliable energy, wind and solar, I mean, I say unreliable because you can't count on when it's going to be available. It's going to weaken the entire grid, and you need to model that into anything that you expect to build in San Antonio. Well, how's that going to affect the time when you actually need the power? And if the whole state is doing this, and as I said in a memo earlier today, it's not likely to be there. How can you model that in to your scenario?
So I've explained this to some folks locally who've kind of gotten into this kind of space. The way we plan for how we're going to serve our customers over time, Dana, ultimately changes depending upon the mix of what's in the market. And, you know, so for us, we're going to have to decide as a community, you know, because listen, if ERCOT's unreliable, guess what? San Antonio's unreliable too. The grid goes down across ERCOT, grid goes down in San Antonio at the end of the day. So we've got to know on, you know, like today's has been kind of average for this week. You know, our load's been, I don't know, Kevin, around 3,000 megawatts, right? Give or take.
Give or
right?
take, yes, sir.
Give or take. So on a hot sunny day, what you gotta start doing is managing that peak. You know, that peak doesn't have to necessarily be generation we build. We've done that over time, right? We've gone from like 8,000 megawatts of firm generation, mostly fossil fuels. You know, we retired Dealey early. That brought us down to 5,000, 6,000 megawatts with our renewables. If we retired the gas steam units, we retired Spruce early, man, we're down around 3,000 megawatts of firm capacity. We've got some renewables. We're going to add more. So we got to figure out how much more dispatchable, you know, units like natural gas or even geothermal is a very dispatchable, you know, resource. How much more of that do you need? Is it 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 megawatts that we manage to, and then we manage the peak some other way? And so the manner in which the resource side of the equation is managed in ERCOT is changing because of battery storage, and we got to figure that out. It's new. The future, Dana, looks nothing like the past. And so our mentality about how we manage it and our technology for doing so has got to change.
Well, I understand that, but you know, your planning has to incorporate a scenario where between the management decisions of CPS and the ERCOT realities, you don't have another situation where your coal plant's down and you have to buy power and you spend $1 billion that you don't have. This can happen again if you don't sort of plan for that. And this is input that I'm getting, that I'm passing on to the management here. That's the first thing they want. Let's just don't let that happen again. And by relying more on the grid, it increases the risk of something bad happening for high cost or not having power available. And I don't see the planning mechanism going in to protect against that. That's all I'm saying here. And I still don't see it. And even though ERCOT's doing, which I think they're doing the wrong thing too, but legislatively they can change that. I don't know that they will, but they should, because it weakens the entire grid. And if the whole grid in Texas is doing the wrong thing, does it really mean that San Antonio has to do the wrong thing too? You know, if we say, all right, ERCOT's doing the wrong thing, maybe we can do something better in San Antonio. It might cost us a little bit more, but will be less risk. And I'll give you an example of that. Austin has the same kind of policies that San Antonio has, and municipal-owned utility. But during the winter storm, they had a coal plant jointly owned with Lower Colorado River Authority, which kept running. Our coal plant was down for whatever reasons, maintenance, and so we ended up spending $1 billion. They made $50 million.
That has nothing to do with their electric operation.
That's true.
Well-
They were down just like, but we spent $1 billion and they didn't. They were blacked out longer than we were.
Yeah, we've got the winter storm thing. We went over that, Dana, and I'm not trying to cut you off.
Yeah,
but-
well, I
but-
understand, but I
we-
don't hear
we-
the planning
but-
going forward.
Well, we're gonna get there, okay? That's what we're trying to do. Look, from the historical data, we learned some stuff. That's what planning is, it's learning. We learned that the utilization on our coal plants are coming down because they were getting beat when the renewables were on. We saw that, we weren't able to bring up and do the things that we had done in the past. We have a very older type mix of units, okay, of electric generation units. We've got these units were set up before we had all of this renewable that's coming on and been subsidized. So now we're going to look, I'm convinced that the CPS staff will look at the ERCOT and what's happening in ERCOT and develop a program that we work with ERCOT. I'm convinced, and if we don't, we'll ask them again, okay? That'll happen. Okay. Done. Okay. Dr. Cantu.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Villagrán. You reminded me of something that I didn't say previously with the comment on why do it. So I talk with my students about this. There is evidence in when Atlanta and Beijing had the Olympics, where there was no vehicle traffic, that there were less hospital visits because of asthma. There were emergency room visits that were decreased. I think there's even some data that when we had our stay-at-home order with the pandemic, that did decrease the visits to emergency rooms for respiratory illnesses, asthma, et cetera. So, Rudy, it may be something that you want to consider in the way CPS talks about cost savings, is what that can mean with cost savings when it comes to health and healthcare as well. Because right now we're spending trillions nationwide. We need to reduce those costs. This has been shown to be one way to decrease costs. Thank you.
Reed? Yeah. Rudy, how many customers does CPS have today? Commercial and residential?
So we've got 900,000, give or take, customers total. About 800 and, it's about 90% of those are residential, about 10% commercial.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, 800,000. So this community is growing so rapidly, as we know. Austin, there's going to be no change between here and Austin. And sorry, I won't be around for it, perhaps, unfortunately. But I think that what we're talking about here seems to me to be incremental additional power. Instead of, I'm wondering, are you planning for this community to have 1,900,000 customers, your utility? Because in 10 or 15 years, it probably will. And are you going to be able to do it with this patch that you're talking about, as opposed to new generation plants?
So the answer to the question is yes. We're growing, give or take about 2% a year, customer numbers. We're growing about 1% in load. A lot of that is energy efficiency. A lot of that is just natural, new things are much more efficient than old refrigerators in houses and things. So there's some natural savings that comes as your community grows. But we have to factor in growth. We have to factor in electrification a lot. I mean, EVs are going to put more demand on our system. We got big customers in San Antonio that are looking to switch their vehicle fleets from natural gas to, or even CNG for our buses, to electric. Because that's the trend. I think 50% of vehicles, the next 10 years are going to be electric vehicles that are bought, because that's going to be the only thing you can buy at the end of the day. So we have to factor in growth. I wish I could tell you that the only equation we're solving for is the incremental. When we take existing plants offline and plants that aren't at the end of their useful life offline, and then factor in growth on top of that, we're doing a fundamental strategy shift in our generation plan. Fundamental. What are you going to replace the existing with? And then how are you going to manage the growth on top of that? So it's not just incremental that we're trying to plan for, which is why it's been so important for me to talk about the fact that we can't just look at shutting spruce down in a vacuum. We got to look at the whole thing, including energy efficiency, and say, okay, what I need my board to tell me is to give me some targets. Rudy, we want you to be this much renewables by this day. We want you to have this much firm capacity, whatever that looks like, and we want energy efficiency, demand response, batteries, things like that to make up this percentage. If they give me some, a plan that now I can go execute to, then they hold me accountable to getting there within some time frame. I got to have them tell me, what does our mix look like in the future? Because it's going to look different than it does today. And that's why this process is so important and why it has to be comprehensive, because it can't just be about shutting spruce down and replacing it with something, because that doesn't show you the whole picture, right?
But back to what you and Dana were talking about. Back to what you and Dana were talking about. We're not in a isolated world, okay? And the state, I think right now, whether they realize it or not, the state is short power when they need it, okay? There's no doubt we're short power, and we're going to need to add power. And so Rudy's absolutely right, Dana. We will have to look at that, and that's why we're trying to look at multiple steps and multiple changes and additions. We've been very fortunate. I think we're, 6,200 or something, the last number I saw on that. And so it's going to be an ongoing problem, and that's what they are going to bring to us. Actually, the CPS staff has got to bring us something first. They're the experts, okay? They got to bring us what they want to do. We'll comment on it. Then they'll put it to the board. For us to tell them what to do is a little bit presumptuous on our part and inappropriate. So I'm very anxious to see what they believe they need to do, what capacities they need to add, what units they need to change. And don't forget, we're sitting here with some legacy plants that were built. One of the Browning plants, at least one I can remember, was built in the 60s. Okay, so I hauled fuel oil into it in the 73. So I know it was there, and it's a long time. Those plants have got to be changed out. Dana, you have something else to say?
Yes, I agree with exactly what you said. I was trying to make the same point, is when the management of CPS, at least in my opinion, and this is just advice only, needs to come up with, distill all these factors into it and come up with recommendations for not only this advisory committee, but for the board to consider, not the other way around. As Reed just said, you're the experts. Come up with some kind of plan that you think is the best thing for CPS. I don't think you can expect the Board of Trustees to do that for you. I don't think they know enough.
Well, Rudy made a really good statement the other day I got to hear, and I have to agree with him. I am gotten to work here in the last few months, and maybe over a year and 4 months with the staff. Some are gone, but they've also got some people that have stepped up, and I think we got a great staff here, and I think they can do it. I have no doubt in my mind. And like I say, let's just do it. All right, we're adjourned.